Chapter 3. The wagon of slave children jogged slowly down the road. The clang of the chained men behind it took up a rhythm. To Julilly, it was a slow, sad rhythm, sad as the bells tolling a death from the village church near Massa Henson's. Julilly could think only of Mammy Sally. Each time the cart turned onto a new road, she expected to see the tall, strong woman with the black headrag come to take her from the wagon and direct the slaves to turn around and go back to Massa Henson's. But each new road was empty. The little children around her wore skimpy clothes. They pressed against Julilly with their hot, dry skin and whimpered like tiny, forgotten sheep. Julilly held two small hands, both sticky with sweat and dust. The sun flamed gold and blistering above them, and the sky became hard and bright blue. There wasn't a wisp of cloud to soften it. Julilly saw the white man who drove their wagon wipe his forehead with a large blue cloth. The brim of his hat hid his face, but his neck was red with sunburn. He cracked his whip over the plodding horse. The fat, oily man behind them snapped his whip over the backs of Ben and Adam and Lester, who shuffled along with their chains. The cart jogged past green cotton fields and spreading tobacco plants. Slaves chopped along the rows with their hoes, just as at Master Henson's. Julilly wondered if they would stop in one of these fields. Why did they go on and on? Where was this deep south she heard the slave traders mumbling about? The sun steamed when it reached the top of the sky and poured down rays of heat over the earth. The children stopped whimpering. Their mouths were too hot and dry for sound. Julilly watched for patches of shade along the road, but the silent pine and wide-spreading oak trees grew away from the wagon's path. The children asked for water. Julilly wanted water, too. She began to see shimmering pools of water ahead of their cart, but each one disappeared when the wagon drew near it. The man in the driver's seat sipped from a dirty bottle and water dripped over his chin. The children watched greedily. The cart began to climb a small hill. At the end of it another, higher hills started. The hills came along like stair-steps. Trees grew thicker and they sucked away some of the heat. A swift-moving stream flashed above them, spilling water through the air. The children clung to Julilly and their eyes spoke fear. They had never seen sheets of falling water. The fat man ordered the driver to stop. His jug needed refilling. There would be a rest. Julilly was too frightened to move. The chained men dropped onto the ground. With the motion ended, she felt the closeness of the driver and the oily man on horseback. But the fat man ambled away with his horse toward the rushing stream, while the driver climbed from his seat and stretched his body under a tree. Julilly and the children watched the splashing water. Standing near it was a tall white man chopping wood with a flashing axe. A young black boy worked beside him, stacking the cut logs into a long, neat pile. With her own need for a drink and her parched, dry mouth, Julilly had forgotten that the children were thirsty too. "Julilly, get us water. Please, Julilly, get us water," they pleaded. Always before when needs came, Mammy Sally had been there to help. A great ache filled Julilly's throat and the still fear of strangeness crept over her. The fat white man was strange and cruel. The falling water was strange and frightening. Ben, Lester, and Adam were like strangers, and they were helpless. Only Lester, the mulatto, raised his head with the same angry eyes. Julilly saw blood on his legs where the chains rubbed back and forth. The tall man near the waterfall looked up and saw the slave children in the cart. He dropped his axe and began walking toward them, motioning for the boy to follow. There was no whip in his hand. His face was bony but gentle. A gray hat circled his head with a large brim, and his long, gray coat had no collar. He walked toward Lester. "Why are you in chains?" he asked quietly. Lester pointed toward the sleeping wagon driver under the tree and then to the fat man on his horse far down the stream. "They took us away from our wives and children. They chained us so we can't escape and go back to them. We've been sold." The tall man shook his head. "You need water," he said simply. He turned to the small black boy. "James, fill the large pail with water and bring the drinking gourds." Within minutes the pail appeared on the road. Gourds were dipped into it, and one by one the men drank. The young boy came toward Julilly and handed her a dripping gourd. He held it for her while she swallowed twice, greedily. Then she stopped, took the gourd from his hands, and carefully held it to the lips of each small child. Julilly wanted to thank him, but she didn't know how. "Are you the slave of that tall man?" she asked instead. "No," the boy said quickly, "I'm free. Mr. Fox pays me for stacking his wood." Before Julilly could say any more, the fat man came bouncing up the road on the back of his horse. He slapped his whip against the naked backs of the chained men and shouted in anger, "Don't you listen to that Quaker abolitionist and that free nigger boy. They got evil in their words and destruction in their ways." The wagon driver shook himself awake and jumped onto his seat. The wagon began to jog and bump. The chains clanked and scraped. Julilly looked again at the free black boy. He stood by the tall man and clasped his hands tight in front of him. Tears fell down his cheeks. A little of the fear and a little of the ache lifted from Julilly. She began repeating the strange words which the fat man had used: Quaker abolitionist, free nigger boy. Quaker abolitionist, free nigger boy, and found herself wondering if the words might have something to do with Canada. Chapter 4. One day was swallowed by the next and then the next. The swaying, jogging wagon became a home for Julilly and the little children. Its scraping, clattering noise was a wall closing out the fat man's shouts and the clanging of the torturing chains. Sometimes it was cold when the night came and the wagon stopped on a tall hill with black trees and silver stars and a biting wind that never stopped. The children clung to Julilly and she warmed them as best she could in her thin, strong arms. When the day came with white-hot sun that baked the road into stifling dust, Julilly cooled the children's mouths with water from the drinking gourd that the free black boy had given her. She always filled it now when the wagon stopped beside a stream and the fat man threw each of them a cold hoe cake with a sop of grease on top. She used the gourd, too, for pouring water over the swollen, bleeding ankles of Lester, Adam, and Ben when the white men left them to fish along a riverbank. Julilly seldom spoke. There was nothing to say. But she shared the others' silent fear and anger. Sometimes when the red-necked driver slept and the fat man strolled off to fish, Julilly thought of jumping from the wagon and running into the woods. But if she did, who would care for the babies in the wagon? Who would pour water over the torn ankles of Lester, Adam, and Ben? She was the only one strong and free enough to help them. She was held, too, by Lester's sullen, glinting hatred and lifted head. His pride brought swish after swish of the fat man's whip across his back. The children cried and the whip poised high above their heads with a threat. "You shut your little black mouths or this whip comes down on you," the fat man cried. In response, Julilly would sing, slow and soft and deep, and the children listened and remembered their mammies and their cabins at Massa Henson's. Julilly yearned for Mammy Sally, and she sang the songs that she had heard Mammy sing. "I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land." Julilly didn't know why, but somehow she drew strength from Lester's high-held head and angry eyes. When she woke up cold and frightened during the night on the rough floor of the wagon, she felt better knowing that Lester was close by. He helped her to remember the free black boy and the tall, gentle man who paid him for his work. Most of all, he helped her remember Canada. One day the wagon slushed through a cypress swamp. The muddy water lay as quiet as a flat, smooth mirror. The trees rose out of it straight and tall, and their soft green needles strained the sun like spreading sieves. Flicks and specks of sunlight sparkled on the water. A heavenly sight, Julilly thought, and held her breath with wonder. But the wet swamp mud sucked down the heavy chains and pulled at the legs of Sam and Adam. They fell splashing and gasping into the water. Lester tugged at their arms, biting his lips against the pain in his own bruised legs. He pulled them out with the bulge of his great muscles. The fat man's whip slapped through the water and onto the wet, muddy backs of the slaves. A sudden shower of rain splashed through the needled trees. The driver of the wagon hunched his shoulders up to the rim of his wide hat until it made an umbrella over him. The fat man urged his horse ahead of the wagon and huddled under a low-branched tree. There was no protection for Julilly and the children or for the struggling men trying to pull themselves from the sucking swamp mud. With the same suddenness as the onset of the rain, Julilly lost her fear. She had to help the men in the water. Maybe it was like Mammy Sally used to say, "The Lord has made you strong and tall for a good reason." She slid to the end of the wagon and began climbing over the side when she saw Lester standing still and staring at her. His head shook slightly, a warning for her not to come. But his face shifted from anger to a quick smile, and his eyes held hers with a look of pride and approval. Lester was proud of her. Julilly waded into the swamp and pulled up the mud-covered chain. Without its heavy weight, the men could lift their legs. The horse tugged at the wagon until it rolled out onto firm, dry ground, and Julilly returned to the little children. The rain stopped and a gold sun poured a warm circle of light over all of them. Julilly began to sing. Jenny crack corn and I don't care, Jenny crack corn and I don't care, Jenny crack corn and I don't care, my mass has gone away. The children smiled and asked her to sing it again.